Lord O'Neill, great to have you on the show. Thanks very much for taking out the time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Top of the mind will be the AMR review, a project that you've been chairing, sponsored by the UK government, and something that you're very passionate about. And you think that India has a very important role to play in combating the rising incidence of drug-resistant infections. Talk about that a bit.
Well, yes, I do. I think it's a huge global problem. As with many global problems, you can't solve them unless the most important countries in the world are crucially at the centre of solving the problem. India's one of those countries. In this particular case, the AMR challenge, the resistance to antimicrobials, particularly antibiotics, is a big challenge for India itself. I like to see it in the context of the Clean India campaign that Modi is embarked on. And India needs to do a lot of things to reduce this problem for itself. But importantly, in terms of trying to make sure all the interests are aligned, in some areas India has some advantages or assets that it can contribute to help the solution. So in this field of diagnostics and in terms of drug production, India has a role to play.
Yeah, but on the surface, what is it that you would hope to achieve, during the Prime Minister's visit in terms of getting a commitment from the government to further the cause? Because the Clean India campaign, the Swachh India campaign, as we know it, is going to be focusing on improving sanitization, improving immunity and immunization. So the focus has to be on essentially getting the government and companies in India to participate in combating this problem, because as far as the state of World Antibiotics Review was concerned, that just came out recently, India is one of the highest consumers of antibiotics in the world. So it's very central for them. So,
yeah, it's very central. I would say there are three things that I would put in the dream category. Okay. The first of which perhaps is reasonably realistic, is that as a result of this trip, or even in the comments the Prime Ministers make together, that India acknowledges that AMR is a global problem, and along with the UK, it would like to highlight its desire to do something about it. That was something that was done recently with the President Xi visits here with the UK, and so for India to give it the same sort of significance would be great. Secondly, in line with that, we are, as a review, promoting the idea of a global R&D development fund, of which the UK and China committed to making some kind of financial contribution. It would be fantastic if India did that as well. The third broader thing really has a whole group of subcategories, which is in terms of surveillance, use of diagnostics, better regulation of the use of antibiotics, thinking about controlling the use of antibiotics for food production. All of those things individually, as part of the third area, are very important for India's own problem with excessive use and misappropriate use of antibiotics to be on the table.
Sure. There are a lot of Indian companies also that would be a part of the visit and would be talking on the sidelines of the Prime Minister's trip. Would you be seeking their interest to invest in this global R&D fund? What's the kind of size and scale that you're looking at? Because you just inked some sort of interest from the Chinese president as well.
So we have published that there's a need for a global research and development fund of about $2 billion over 5 years. And we want any people or companies involved in the whole health space, particularly as it relates to antibiotics, to get involved. So, yeah, we would love for Indian pharma companies to contribute. More importantly, India pharma companies should also think about themselves as being potential beneficiaries if they pursue some more R&D in this space. Tangentially to it, very well-known Indian company Cipla is thinking a lot about the repositioning of existing drugs, maybe in different combinations, which is a very interesting way of trying to, perhaps with less real genuine scientific breakthrough as such, so not getting new Nobel Prizes, but repositioning drugs to try and make them more effective when the existing combinations don't work. And it's something that Cipla has talked a lot about, and importantly, was a group that we've been talking to and influencing how we're thinking.
Oh yeah, in fact let's talk about that, because Dr. Hamid just joined your board. You've also been in active dialogue with SRL, which is a leading diagnostics company in India. Do you expect more participation, more technical know-how coming in from Indian pharma companies to further this cause?
Well, if as a result of our interview and this trip, it highlights the kind of things that we're opening doors to, including more Indian companies, it would be fantastic to have more Indian involvement. The way I've approached chairing this review is it's a challenge with enormous different facets of complexity and separate issues, and we don't like to think we own the intelligence to all the solutions, and we're actively encouraging more and more people, especially from the so-called emerging world, to come forward and help us with solutions. In saying all of this, I still remember well when I first met the SRI people when we visited India back in March of this year. Here is a state-of-the-art diagnostics company, which is, amongst other things, looking at blood samples from some of London's best hospitals and sending them back to those hospitals more quickly and more cheaply than those hospitals can analyse those blood samples themselves. So there is probably more of those kind of entities in India that can play a bigger role on the global stage than we know of, and it would be great for them to get involved with us.
But how do you position yourself, under this review, in terms of convincing the government as well as pharma companies that this is a project that needs attention? One, and secondly, that it's viable. It's viable for a lot of pharma companies, because we have a lot of generic players in India, which that sell generic antibiotics, and one of them is on your board now, Cipla, so you would get some critical advice there as well. But at the end of the day, a lot of pharma companies will say, "What is in it for us?"
So two angles to your question. The first angle is I think, very important, and I've been spending quite a bit of time going back since the spring to try and encourage China to put this topic as a specific focus on the G20 agenda, because next year we have this historic moment where China is going to chair the G20 for the first time. And if China were to agree to that, I think, partly because China often sees itself as a champion for the emerging world, this would dramatically escalate the awareness of all these issues, and with it, focus of G20 policymakers on coming up with the right solutions. So it's important in its own right. It's also important in the context of the second part of your question, which is about pharma companies, because as your question implies, right now, a lot of Western pharma companies don't really see themselves as being excited about the idea of trying to spend a lot of their hard-earned dollars on trying to find new drugs to increase
because they would
supply.
rather invest and do R&D in the high-margin, high-priced drugs, especially the patented products. So what gets them to focus and invest in this space?
So I think there are two things, one of which directly relates to it becoming a G20 priority. If they can see that global policymakers are taking the challenge of AMR more and more seriously, it implies, at a minimum, that G20 policymakers are going to do something in order to enable the problems to be solved. In parallel to that, we have already published that in order to get the new kind of drugs that will solve the supply problem for a generation, something like $15 to $35 billion is going to be needed to induce pharmaceutical companies to come up with these drugs. We have been careful to, so far, not prescribe the exact way and who the exact payer of this $15 to $35 billion are, but the pharmaceutical industry, I think, would be prepared to play the role that's necessary if they were given the right set of incentives or rewards and or subsidies in order to do that. And we have laid out...
That's where the government's role comes in, where they incentivize these companies to invest and perhaps work out a formula by which they get some sort of benefit on account of that investment.
Well, there's a whole range of different ways you can look at it, but around it, that's the sort of approach one's got to go down. It could be direct buyouts, which is closer to the specific best idea we put forward, or at the other extreme, it could be that the global pharma industry is going to get less favourable tax treatment about a number of other things it likes to do, unless it's prepared to spend more of its capital on solving this problem. And these are the sorts of issues that we need to spend more and more time on as we move towards our final recommendations next year.
Sure. So aside of financial aid from the government, the Indian government, are you also looking at some sort of a marketing tie-up, as we spoke about it, under the Swachh India campaign, where you talk about the awareness, you fix responsibility, you tell people out there that this is a critical problem, because we're looking at almost 10 million deaths per year happening potentially by 2050 if this problem is not resolved, and if new drugs, new antibiotics do not hit the markets.
So there are both a demand problem and a supply problem, and what we've talked about so far is primarily new drugs. Just as important, if not more, is the demand problem, where we have to reduce everybody's dependency on antibiotics and to use them better. So I wrote an article many months ago about 10 things necessary to solve this problem. 2 of them relate to kind of global campaigns. One is which fits in very well with the Modi Clean India campaign. It's just simply trying to get people to, as a course of habit, to wash their hands especially when they've been to the toilet, rather than not bothering, because that spreads infection.
Sure.
And secondly, with it, to embark on a massive global PR campaign, particularly with the next generation and the growth of things like WeChat in China and Bollywood and its focus in India. We believe that these forms of media communication can be really influential in changing the mindset of the next generation.
Also over-the-counter prescriptions, right, where people can just go and buy antibiotics over the counter, which also, and self-prescription in a way, which also leads to the problem getting more intense. So, you essentially are going to be looking at an extensive marketing campaign as well, if the government is interested.
So what would follow, I would hope, assuming that the G20 do adopt this as a priority, and that the United Nations then follow up with some kind of global agreement, it would require much more rigorous control of how antibiotics can be bought. And in India, as I'm sure you know, it needs to be tightened up considerably.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow, and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.